Jake, as a reminder, I just noticed you're freshly shaved.
I am freshly shaved, fresh haircut.
I am lacking both of those things.
Same.
I never freshly shaved, but I did.
Now you look like you're 13 instead of 22.
Yeah.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
I'm Dan.
And I am Gold Eagle Jake.
And tonight we are talking about improved distilleries. More specifically, distilleries that we think vastly improved in the last 5 or so years. As we've been going through some different master classes and things like that, I think we've all kind of discovered some distilleries that we written off previously, and now are pretty big fans of. So yeah, we thought this would be a good topic because there's probably a lot of people out there who wrote off the same distilleries that we did. So yeah, what were you going to say, Dan?
It'll be interesting. It was tough to go through. It was a tough thought process. It wasn't easy.
Mm-hmm.
See, for me, it was so easy.
It was easy for me too, but I know me and Jake are going to pick at least 2 of the same ones, so I'm trying
to we'll have pretty similar lists.
I mean, it's interesting because like a lot of the big guys, they have some side brands that you could talk about might have improved, or some other labels that are more recent. Like a lot of the big guys, there's been a ton of changes. Like one thing I thought of is some of the larceny barrel proofs as of late are better than the previous larceny barrel proofs from I think the first one I had a few years ago. But I don't think I would say like something like that's most improved because it was already starting off pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Great, captivating comments.
So is that what? That's your first. That's your
no,
first one?
No, it's not. I'm not putting them on. But it's like okay. you look at places like that are big that have a pretty old establishment, and some of the stuff is just changing for a little bit better. But getting a little bit better when you're already really, really good is not as much as what some of this. I think the craft sector is where I was really looking at on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
do you want to go first?
I think the craft sector is a lot easier to kind of focus on because when you do look at the big distilleries that are mass distilling, they're making so much and they're blending so many barrels together compared to a small craft distillery that you really shouldn't taste much of a difference. And they've been around for a long time. They know exactly what they're doing. A lot of these small distilleries are making a ton of tweaks as they go, and kind of meshing together. I mean, we learned so much at the Whiskey Acres Masterclass a couple weeks ago about how you guys are using all these different yeast strains and using these different mash bills and doing all these slight tweaks and then kind of blending these different changes together. So the consumer might not notice a change right away, but if you compare a bottle from 4 years ago to today, it'll probably be a night and day difference. And I think when you look at the bigger distilleries, you need to almost separate it just on labels. Like you could talk about larceny, you could talk about McKenna as a label and how it's gotten better or gotten worse. But I think it's a lot easier to focus on a smaller distillery in terms of the entire distillery improving or declining in taste.
Yeah,
and that's the thing is it's like the bigger ones aren't making a lot of tweaks. Like they're putting different experimental things out there as a one-off release and things like that. They're doing that. A lot of what's happening, like for example, like the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof last year that won so many awards. It was just an older blend of their barrel proof, and they had some really old stuff in it. It's not like they're changing. I guess not the core concept of who they are as a distillery, but their core recipes, their core fundamentals, what they've done for decades upon decades. They're still using for 99% of the stuff they produce, the same mash bill, the same yeast, the same everything, blending from barrels where they know are going to be perfect for what they're trying to create in the rick houses, things like that. Where the small craft, you're changing. I mean, we're changing entire mash bills or yeast strains mid-year just to try something different.
Yeah, and I think the question was what distilleries have improved, and I think if you're going to pick a big time distillery, you're going to have to go through all those labels and argue why each label has improved. Whereas with a smaller guy, you're kind of just there's only so much they make and so much they blend together that you just notice changes a lot quicker.
Yeah. Well, Jake, do you want to go first?
I didn't want to go first because I have 4 that I feel very strongly about, and I wanted to throw in the one that you guys didn't pick, but I think I'm just going to break the rules and go ahead and talk about 4 distilleries.
That's all right.
For me, this was very, very easy. I'll say them all, and then I'll kind of go into depth a little bit. Number 1, the biggest improvement that I've seen is Few. And then these are in no particular order, but Whiskey Acres, Town Branch, and Driftless Glen. So I'll talk about Few and Driftless Glen together because kind of same situation. I had tried them 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and kind of written them off, as you said earlier, just because there wasn't really anything that wowed me. It tasted crafty. It tasted young. Both of those I know Few was using a majority of smaller barrels, 30 gallons and 15 gallons. I'm pretty sure Driftless Glen did a little bit of small barrel stuff, but both are now on to entirely 53 gallon. Both side by side, to me, taste nothing like they did 5 years ago. And we even have a bottle of Few American whiskey at the bar that has sat there for so long. It's probably been there for 4 years. And you can go side by side that with today's American whiskey that is available as 2 different pours at Gold Eagle. And it's a night and day difference. I mean, the Sydney Jones, who's the master blender, I think that's her title, of Few, but basically in charge of all the whiskey. She took over about 3.5 years ago to do a little bit more innovation and just kind of get an outsider perspective to tweak things. And I think that's just an example of a distillery that has made tweaks over and over and over until they finally found something. And obviously it's working because Heaven Hill, who we all know, purchased Few, purchased the brand, the brand group that Few was part of. So obviously somebody is taking notice to them and their quality improving. But I could go on and on all night about Few. If you have tried them or, I would say if you tried them over a year or 2 ago and you weren't a fan, it's absolutely worth revisiting. And I'll throw in a good coupon code for our Few barrel pick. We have a 6-year bottled and bond bourbon from them, and it's $44.99 on the shelf. Use code BMFEW and get 10% off that bottle. So you'll be getting a 6-year bottled and bond bourbon for under $40 from a local distillery. That's a good example of Few quality compared to how they were a couple years ago. And then Driftless Glen, I hadn't tried too much from them, but I just kind of remember just not really being impressed and just meh when I tried them 4 or 5 years ago. And then we did a master class with them recently, and I think everyone in the crowd was impressed. And it's a distillery that everyone kind of passes by. I will say their single barrels, the biggest takeaway from that masterclass was how many more people preferred the small batch over the single barrels, bourbon and rye. So I think obviously we all know with a single barrel, it just depends on what barrel you get. But their small batch bourbon and rye are really, really good everyday pours. 96 proof, under $40 on the shelf. So if you're just looking for something easy to drink with good flavor, Driftless Glen small batches are very good. On to my next one, Town Branch. Town Branch, we're going to be doing a really, really cool tasting with them on August, I think it's 15th, whatever that Wednesday is of that week, where they're bringing in one of every barrel proof bourbon release that they've put out in the last 5 years, just so people can see how their quality has improved. They've gone through 3 or 4 different master distillers just in the last 3 years. And it's a pretty big thing to note because their barrel proof bourbon blends are blended solely by their master distiller. So they've kind of shuffled people through. And another thing to note is their new mash bill is now coming of age. They were a pretty high malt content before, and they dropped that malt content and added a bit more rye. So right now, what we're tasting, all of their barrel proof bourbons, they've slowly increased the percentage in the blends of that new mash bill with the higher rye. And now they are almost run through all of their old mash bills. So we should be starting to taste more of their high rye bourbon. And they're priced right. Their barrel proof bourbons are on the shelf at $45 a bottle. We have a 7-year barrel proof single barrel that's $49.99, 117 proof. You don't find that value in Kentucky bourbon. You don't find that value in any bourbon out there. So if you're looking for something, it's a little different. The malt still kind of comes through. They're a brewery too, and they're using some brewer mash bills and whatnot, but I would definitely give that one a shot. Go to the bar and try it. I'll give a coupon code for that too, 10% off our Town Branch barrel pick. So $49.99 down to about $43. But BM Town gets you 10% off our Town Branch barrel pick. 2 great ones to try, under $100 for 2 different bottles. And then finally, Whiskey Acres, which I'm not going to go into a ton because I'm sure one of you guys picked them, I think. And we kind of praise on Whiskey Acres a lot. But, going back to that masterclass that we did a couple weeks ago, tried so many different things. It's obvious you guys are making a lot of tweaks, and the stuff is just starting to taste better. It's for sure a distillery that I also wrote off about 5 years ago and we never really had on the shelf. But their bottled and bond bourbon and rye are both incredible. The single barrels that we're picking, I think, are some of the best single barrels, and I know that because they kind of sit on the shelf for a little bit, and then after a month goes by, they disappear really quick. So people aren't fully into the Whiskey Acres hype yet, but they're starting to notice. And after tasting these single barrels, people are definitely impressed. So be on the lookout. We are coming with another one soon. It's going to be something very new, very special, and very different. If you have tasted Whiskey Acres, even if you've tried everything Whiskey Acres and still aren't a big fan like we are, this one is completely different with the mash bill, and I'll just leave it at that and make you wait until the release.
This one will totally change minds.
Oh yeah. How did you get to pick a barrel like that? That sounds pretty impressive.
Some asshole.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're a first time listener, I think all the listeners can answer that question. But yes. Thank you, Dan, for bringing us a sample of something very new and very special that nobody outside of distillery employees knew existed until
most distillery employees
masterclass.
didn't know that barrel existed either. So,
all right, most distillery employees didn't know that existed. So, be on the lookout for that barrel pick, which I think maybe about a month or two.
Hopefully, a few months
get it bottled.
Yep,
a few months. Yeah, we're gonna let it age a little bit longer, but we'll have it soon.
Yeah, I'm not gonna shit too much on your list. I think it's very, very good.
Yeah, I thought.
What are you going to shit on with my list?
I'm not going to shit on any of them. I'm just going to say I can't give advice on one of them because I've never tried it, nor will I ever try it.
Driftless Glen.
And that's going to be Driftless Glen. I used to work for one of the owners when I was a young college kid, and learned a lot about that gentleman when I was shredding a lot of evidence in a storage room for a big trial that was going on. I didn't find out about that until afterwards. So I don't like that human being. So I'm sorry if that's political, but I'm not going to support his company through product purchase.
That's not political.
Well, you'd be surprised.
That's just you using
that's
your
just my
personal
personal
grudges
thing. I don't like the person that I guess technically his name isn't on it, but it's his wife's name, and they have some ties to this area.
Yeah, I mean, the question was most improved distilleries, so I'm just telling you what I've tasted and what I think is the most improved. And I also think it's good to note that all of these distilleries that I picked have never sourced a single drop of whiskey. They've all distilled everything from the get-go, which we know is very difficult to do. You're not just going to get a home run right away. So don't count out the smaller guy that's doing all their own distilling. It takes time for tweaks to happen and stuff to age and quality to improve. So I think that's the moral of the story here with my list.
Well, good thing is you had 4 because I'm only going to talk about 2. And I will expand a little bit further on your Whiskey Acres thing because the last thing I want is Jake to try and talk about any of our shit. It's just an imbecile.
I left them off the list because I knew Jake was going to pick them, and of course you're going to talk about them because you can't stop plugging. My God.
When you talk about our change, and if you were at the master class with me and got to try some of the different things and different yeasts and different mash bill things that we've been doing, one, it's not just because we're experimenting, but 2 is Rob is going into his 8th year as a distiller or master distiller. When he started, he didn't have any distilling experience. Very similar setup to when Torbeg was in talking about getting everybody from Isle of Skye. Rob didn't have any experience, but during his time working there, he ended up getting a master's in fermentation science while he was working there. It took a few years. And a lot of that stuff that's 3.5, 4, 5 years old is stuff that he's made since then. Mm-hmm. So when we started making things, we were taught obviously by Dave Pickerel, and he gave us how to do everything. He showed us how to do everything, and this is how Dave would do it. Now, unfortunately, Dave didn't stick around on the planet too long after that to be able to come back and keep tasting and offering recommendations. So the way we kind of ran was that's what Dave taught us. That's what we should do. And obviously our philosophy has always been we want to showcase the grain off. But one of the constant feedback things that we get, for good or worse, is the grain flavor on it, the corn notes in it. So I think everyone is able to tell. I don't think anyone thought the first 3 whiskeys we tried at the master class were the same. They're the exact same. A couple were barreled a couple days apart, and the only difference was yeast. And only the first sip did anybody say really corn. So we had Rob to learn how to distill for a few years. While he was learning how to distill, he was learning the education of it. And since then, he's stuck around, and he's been able to tweak some things. And some of those tweaks he's made are coming out. And I think the third highest ranked whiskey we tried that night was a 3.5-year-old bourbon with a specific style of yeast that we've used a lot of lately. And that says a lot when it was going up against 7, 8-year-old, 5-year-old stuff, 5.5-year-old stuff that just some small tweaks changed it. But that's the thing is like a lot of these younger distilleries, you want to get that person in that has that knowledge and can learn that experience and then make those tweaks. So many times anymore, we see distillers hop from place to place to place so they're trying to get their name up. Where we've been lucky where Rob loves where he's at. Rob loves what he does, loves that he has all this experimentation that he can do. He just basically goes and asks a question. He gets to do what he wants. But we're seeing that practice and patience start to pay off. So I think it's only going to lead to better and better things. And like we said, we played with mash bills. We played with yeast. We've played with adding bacterias in things. And that's, I think, why it's easier also for smaller distilleries to change is because it doesn't take much to make a big change to your volume when your numbers are lower. So,
yeah, you're a little bit more agile. And can do some one-off things like that.
Yeah, you can't speed up the aging process, but I mean, if you're producing 300 barrels in 1 year, you decide to produce 50 barrels of one. That's a 60-year inventory for the year. So it's easy to make a big change pretty quickly. So I'm going to say us. The other one I wanted to talk about is someone I don't think we've ever even mentioned on here before. Maybe we have. When I first tried their stuff a few years ago, because we've had some of their stuff at the distillery, I wasn't a big fan of it. But I'm going to go over to Missouri and talk about Rikers. They are a Missouri distillery that I feel has changed quite a bit. I'm still not a big fan of their rye, but I feel their bourbon gets stronger and stronger each time I've tasted it. They're a little bit larger than us. They had a little bit more distribution than us as well. But that is one where I am really impressed with a lot of the whiskey that's coming out of Missouri. And I know we talked about it a few months ago. With now Missouri has their own Missouri bourbon laws to call themselves Missouri bourbon. But Rikers is something that I can see becoming larger and larger here soon. About a year and a half ago, it was kind of the tail end of all the smaller guys getting bought up by the big ones. We haven't really seen a ton of mid to large craft get bought up by a big name in the last year or so. But I feel they're one that would be on the cusp if that was still going on.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've never talked about them on here. And I will admit, like, they're kind of somebody that I wrote off about 4 years ago. We would get requests here and there, but they're just kind of, small distillery, not local, just a hard one to keep on the shelf and keep going. We do have a couple bottles of their Kansas Jayhawks championship bourbon. If anyone's interested, I think there's 3 bottles left of that, and I'm not going to give a coupon code because it's something that we'll never get again. But yeah, if you're a Kansas Jayhawk fan, make sure you buy that. That's a very pretty bottle with Jayhawks all over it. It was distilled or bottled on the day they won the championship, something like that. So,
were they in the Advent calendar?
Their rye was, and I absolutely hated their rye.
Oh, okay. I think I like that one.
That was the one that everyone basically unanimously said they hated, and then Jake's like, "Oh, I like this one."
Hey, when you have good taste, sometimes you got to stand alone and stand strong. Have you noticed
a pattern with your good taste? How it doesn't match up with everyone else's taste? I think at a certain point, maybe it's not everyone else's palate that's bad. If there's one asshole,
that everyone else's palate is bad.
If there's one asshole in every room and you can't figure out who that asshole is, I think you know who the asshole is, right?
Yeah.
So what are you going with, Jake? Who are you think has been improving?
So Few is also on my list. I'll re-emphasize it. I had written them off a while ago. I went to the master class because Jake told me I absolutely should be there, and that I would be impressed, and I absolutely was. Everything they had in that lineup was absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I'm a big fan now. Definitely worth checking out if you have not in a while. Definitely putting out some good stuff. A similar case to Few is Widow Jane. I had tried Widow Jane maybe 3 or 4 years ago and did not care for it at all. I want to say it was one of the special releases. It was like a 13 or 14-year-old.
13.
I think so. And I hated it. Went to the master class, again at Jake's suggestion, and was really blown away. They've also recently been bought by Heaven Hill. I think it was 2 years ago. So that is clearly paying dividends to them in terms of how they're sourcing things. It's probably safe to say that a lot of their barrels are now Heaven Hill barrels. And it's definitely showing in the quality of their stuff. So yeah, I'm a big fan of what they have out right now as well. So my top one is probably going to be the most controversial. I picked Jack Daniels. The
I don't
release
think
of
that's
the
very
Bonded.
controversial.
Yeah, the labels that they are putting out after only having one or two labels for like 100 years. One, I've talked about this before, infuriates me a little bit that we had to wait so long for bottled and bond bourbon from them, or bottled and bond Tennessee whiskey, because it's absolutely incredibly good. Also, the bonded rye is absolutely phenomenal, and also a release in the past 2 years for the first time. They're barrel proof, single barrel bourbon and single barrel proof rye are both released in like the past 10 years or so. So like they're doing a lot of really good stuff at Jack, and I think I think a lot of people have caught on by now that they're actually making really, really good whiskey. But yeah, since like the 60s, a lot of people just wrote Jack off as old number 7. Like that's bullshit rock gut that you mix with Coke. So like they're kind of really doing a lot to turn that image around. And it's really cool to see.
While Dan's doing his research to try and prove you wrong, I'm just going to piggyback on that and say I totally agree. I think it's a great example of a bigger distillery improving and maybe thinking outside the box a little bit, because I don't think they're, they always had the whiskey, they always had the quality, but they just weren't doing anything with it. The barrel proof single barrel bourbon I know has been out for a little bit, but it used to just sit and collect dust, and people would look at it like, why would I pay $65 for Jack Daniels? So I think they did a tremendous job differentiating their specialty older releases than just the straight number 7. I love how they're in different bottles. I love how the labels look completely different. And a lot of whiskey people a lot of bourbon people who never even gave Jack a shot are starting to really come around. And I think their barrel proof releases and their bonded releases are freaking phenomenal, and amazing that they're coming more regularly available.
Yeah, and I think too they really did a lot to pave the way for Tennessee whiskey becoming a little bit more of like a widely accepted subcategory. Like, because it used to just be basically Jack and Dickel, and everybody for some reason hates Dickel. And then Jack was Jack. But I think a lot of these special releases from Jack have paved the way for some of the other smaller Tennessee brands that are pretty well lauded in past few years to come up and really start gaining some good feedback from people. So I think that's important too.
I'm not going to shit on it too much because I just killed this bottle tonight on the cast. So I'm not trying to shit on it too much as I've finished off a Jack Bonded. I don't have hardly any at all problem with that, because they when you think about Jack, it was their Jack number 7, or if you wanted something fancy, you'd go Gentleman Jack.
Yeah.
And it's got to be a matter of time until Gentleman Jack's not made anymore, because it can't be moving nearly as well as this other stuff.
I mean, you hit it the nail. You hit the nail on the head. Like, the Gentleman Jack is for the number 7 drinker who wants something fancy.
Yeah.
The other stuff is for bourbon drinkers.
Just go, if you want something fancy, go get the Bonded.
The only thing I was trying to look up about what I was trying to shit on you about is the Bonded's been around for a bit, just not in the U.S. I was trying to find how long it's been out in the overseas market.
That's fair.
That's where it started. It was overseas for I know a few years, if not more than that. overseas. And one of the reasons it's in the 700 milliliter bottle is they don't have to make a new bottle for it since they were already using this. So I don't think the rye was out.
The barrel proof rye is new. And the barrel proof rye is new. The barrel proof
the triple
bourbon's
mash
been out for a while. Triple mash is new as far as I know.
Yeah.
I just love when Dan gets that face like, what did you just say? And then he starts typing.
Well, I was trying to. I couldn't find a date because it says since 2022 in the U.S., but it didn't say anything on there about how long it's been overseas.
Yeah, and then when he finds out I'm right, and his face just goes back to normal with a tinge of sadness.
How do you know what that looks like? Because that has never once happened on this podcast. That has never once happened. You've never proven me wrong on the podcast, and you've never beat me in a strategy game. The two things you haven't beat me, Duncan.
Yeah, I know. We've only played a couple different strategy games. I'm still trying to find the one that'll work for me.
He's trying to find like some remote game that I've never heard of. Which the one time we played the last one, he was all cocky that he was going to win, and we started adding up points, and someone wasn't paying attention to what I was doing.
No, I did not pay attention to what I was doing, and I ended the game too early. You're talking about Scythe, right?
Scythe.
Yeah, it's like
it's a board game with like 8,000 rules on it, and then I saw something that was a multiplier, and I'm like, you know what? We're just going to multiply everything.
You know what would be a good idea?
I ended the game early, and I shouldn't have. I should have built up more points, and then I could have won. But
you guys could start a Games Matter podcast.
No, we could, but it'd just be a perspective of a winner versus the perspective of a loser, which I guess would be fun.
But one thing I do want to talk about...
Perspective of someone that doesn't know all these games. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I didn't know them either, but I learned them and I beat them in a matter of minutes.
But one thing I do think we should touch on are... depends on how much we want to call anybody out, but I think there are several distilleries that we hoped had improved in the last 5 years and have not, or maybe fallen flat. I know for me, one of those is Castle and Key. While their rye is still spectacular, I don't know if their bourbon is ever really going to get to where I would want it to be.
Well, hold on.
It's only been a couple years, though.
Pause for a second.
Yeah.
All right. I agree with you. The first thing that comes to mind for me is Castle and Key. Their bourbon just hasn't done it for us yet. I know they've made some major tweaks, though.
Oh yeah, that's what my caveat was going to be. They changed their distillery and they changed a lot. So
I'm pretty sure
we'll taste that in a few years, probably.
I'm pretty sure they changed their mash bill already. They changed one of the grains in their straight bourbon already. And we know that they're producing, even though it's not under their name, they're producing some high quality spirits there with the other brands that they're contract distilling for and aging. So I still have hope, but yes, Castle and Key is probably the first thing that comes to mind, because they've had several different bourbon releases yet, and we haven't really seen an increase in quality. It's just kind of everyone has fell flat to me.
Yeah,
but I'm not giving up.
Keep going. You're wrong on that one, Jake. Me and Jake both don't like you for that one. Keep going.
Jake just said he agreed with me.
I said it's probably the first thing that comes to mind. I'm kind of 50-50. I'm still gonna give him some more time. But yeah,
you also said, and they probably never will. I haven't liked their bourbon for 2 years.
You didn't let me finish.
They'll probably never get better.
There's a huge initial batch of bourbon that they produce that's all the same that they need to get through. That's what I was gonna say.
It's not all the same because they're all different batches.
And it sells still sells off the shelf.
See this? Remember your comment about you proving me wrong and the way my face looks, and yet I just keep proving you wrong.
It's the same. They weren't tweaking much.
Hey, who else you got for disappointments?
That was the big one. I don't know if there's any others.
I could come up with disappointing ones either quicker than I could come up with improved ones.
See, I can't.
You guys are going to hate me for my disappointments, but the way I look at things, the first two that came to mind are big ones. Are not like big boys, but ones that you guys like a lot. I'm going to say the first two that came to mind were Blue Run and Peerless.
Okay. Blue Run.
And the reason I'm going to go with those is I have no problem paying money for good bourbon. They are high-priced bottles. And again, it's only been a few years, but nothing has really changed a ton for me to warrant spending the amount of money they want for their bourbon on the shelf at that price.
So I'll throw a totally on board with Blue Run. I'm not on board with the Peerless, and I would like to talk about that after Jake's done.
I am a big fan of Blue Run's rye.
Shocker. Jake's a big fan of someone's rye.
We tried their high rye bourbon. I did not care for it very much. Might have tried one other bourbon from them, and I don't think I
tried
really
a bunch
liked
because
it.
They wrote you a handwritten letter when you were buying shit online from them.
Well, I bought a bunch of the rye because I really liked it. Like Emerald rye, I think is my favorite. There's like 2 or 3 varieties that they produce. But their rye is pretty good. Probably distilled by Bardstown. They're pretty prominently featured in the Bardstown gift shop. So that would be my guess on where the bulk of that comes from. But bourbon I don't think is really there yet for them. Though I would give them a shot. They're building their own distillery and stuff, but we're not going to see anything out of there for probably 5+ years.
Yeah,
I don't think they've even broken ground on that yet.
No, I would almost compare them to like a Castle and Key situation, though. For me, like I do have hope that they're going to get better, but I mean, they came out with like a couple like 12-year barrel proof bottles when they first started, which I think got a lot of people's eyes on them. But now everything they're putting out is like 4 or 5 year with no age statement, and it costs about $90. So I think they have a long way to go.
Too expensive
to keep building the brand. I think it's a brand that just has way too much money behind them. They're building like a state of the art. We talked about them on an episode a little while back. But that distillery they're building looks very cool. It looks like it's going to be a very cool place to visit. Obviously, they have way too much money. And I think we're at least 5-10 years, probably closer to 10 away from us tasting some really good stuff from them. Just because they're also going to need to make a lot of tweaks and probably get some bigger name people in there to help them do those tweaks and get them on the right
That could be their downfall, though. I mean,
it also could, yeah.
I mean, they're spending all this money. What's the whiskey world going to look like in 10 years when you can walk into almost any place and find Weller 12 on the shelf?
Yeah, I mean, but they're also trying to create with their distillery. They're trying to create a destination, something that people will travel to. Like it really looks cool, and I don't think people are going to care. You know, they're not going to care about the quality as much. They're just going to want to go there to visit, which is not the best thing. But
they are.
If they're not selling, they won't be able to keep the doors open for people to go.
They're positioning themselves to be like an ultra premium brand. Like that's pretty clear. So, they'll just keep sourcing if they have to.
And they'll
blend their little bits of distillate in, and
it'll be the people who have a ton of. I mean, I almost want to like compare it to like a Johnny Walker Blue. Like the people that like it are the people that have bland palates and have way too much money to spend on whiskey and just want something that costs a lot just so they can show their friends, put the bottle on their shelf. I mean, they're cool looking bottles. They're neat. They're nice and, tied up, whatever. But yeah, I think we're a ways away if we see good whiskey, but that's not someone I would completely rule out. Anyone else have anything to say on Blue Run?
No. Go ahead and defend Peerless from Dan's shitting.
defend Peerless, and I also will say I 100% agree with your point of view, because I think from a retail perspective I know we're not average consumers, but to the average consumer, I think their everyday stuff is way too expensive and really not the best quality. I think their single barrels, which are pretty much the same price as their small batch blends, and usually their single barrels are much older, are absolutely incredible. They do a very good job picking single barrels for their single barrel program and for the gift shop, and they sell a ton of single barrels out of the gift shop. That's where all of their top quality whiskey is going, is into single barrels through the gift shop. They are also letting stuff age. They are planning to come out with a 10-year in the next year or two, and they have some different mash bills that they're playing around with that people don't even really know exists yet. So Peerless, I really, really would like to see them releasing more single barrels out into the distribution market. And I would also like to see them lower the price on their small batch bourbon and rye, because I do agree with you, they're 100%. They're way overpriced, and the quality just isn't there like it is on the single barrels.
Mm-hmm. Question with that then.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be worth them to make a small pivot and get away from small batch and do more like a Blanton's and just do single barrels?
Yeah,
make it a single barrel bourbon?
I do. But then question for you as a distiller, what do you do with all those barrels that you think are not good enough to be a single barrel?
Sell them. Move them sideways.
Sell them off to other distilleries?
Or finish them. Put them in double oak or some other kind of secondary finishing.
Move them sideways. Europe needs a lot of bourbon. Move them sideways. You don't make as much money, but if you can make more money, they can make a lot more money and move a lot more single barrels at that price. And I guarantee you, if you walked into a store and saw a Peerless small batch for $90 and Peerless single barrel for $90, you'd pick up the single barrel 100% of the time.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, they sell. I was just going to point out that they sell their single barrels at the distillery for like 140, 150, and people still buy them and they sell out. And what they have going for them with their single barrels is they name all of them and they put a little colorful sticker on the side, and they're spot on with their names. Like they have like lemon meringue, root beer, Coca-Cola, and then you pick up that bottle and you taste those tasting notes. So they found a good niche with naming single barrels and having the tasting notes kind of follow the name, and it makes people want all these different flavors, if you will, of Peerless single barrels.
Yeah, they obviously could make way more money off single barrels. So, but if they wanted to go that approach, they would still probably be able to make a decent amount of money, if not the same, if they're doing single barrels and everything else that they don't like, that they can just move sideways either in the U.S. or internationally.
Yeah. I still think the price point is really high, even for the single barrels.
Yeah, I mean,
the first thing I think, like whenever I hear Peerless and everyone wants, Peerless double oaked, get it, the bottle looks cool. Give me a Woodford double oaked for way less price and way better quality than the Peerless double oaked.
Yeah, the Peerless double oak is pretty good, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with the cost versus some of the other options.
Yeah. And maybe that's it. Maybe I just need to get some better single barrels to see the value of the price. I currently don't, where it's at. And unless the whiskey's really improving, I don't see that it's going to be worth that. But maybe it's just the right single barrels.
I am somebody we do go to Peerless every year and do barrel picks. Which I think last year and the year before there was only 5 single barrels that came to Illinois, so there really isn't a ton of people tasting all these single barrels, but I have noticed a quality increase tremendously in the whiskey. But yeah, I think to the everyday consumer who is not going through their rickhouse tasting barrels, their small batch stuff, which is really the only thing they sell to the public outside of the double oak and like the high rye, those are overpriced, and they need to up that quality for sure. and up the age a little bit, which we know with a new distillery who's not sourcing doesn't happen overnight. And the single barrels are starting to get older. The first year we went down there, we picked 4-year barrels, then 5-year barrels, and now this year we picked 6 and almost 7-year barrels. So I think it's somebody to be like a Castle and Key maybe in Blue Run. Like, definitely don't write them off. Keep a close eye on them. But yeah, I don't ever recommend their small batch whiskeys to people, just the single barrels.
Yeah. All right.
All right, Jake, do you have any disappointments you want to go over? Gold Eagle?
Going back to good distilleries, any honorable mentions that don't necessarily fit within the rules?
What were the rules?
I mean, we're not talking about like.
He didn't give us any rules.
Yeah, I was just kind of messing with you.
And the only other one that came to my head was New Riff. I'd say most improved is hard to say because they kind of came out of the gate really great. And they're, fairly new. So like the improvement factor isn't there, but for being a new distillery pumping out such good product, like right off the line is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I would agree. I think and they're kind of letting their stuff age. They just came out with an 8-year that I thought was pretty good, but still a lot of room for improvement with them as well. I guess my honorable mention would be Virginia Distilling with Courage and Conviction. I think compared to their batch ones, what they're putting out today is noticeably better, and especially the single barrel that we picked, I think is one of the better whiskeys I've had this year, and will probably be in contention for my top whiskeys of the year. And they also took a price decrease across the board, which we don't normally see. So I think quality getting a little bit better with a pretty significant, it was like a 10 to 15% price decrease on all their whiskeys. I think they're definitely my honorable mention.
Yeah, they're a good one. Dan and I tried them 2 or 3 years ago, I think, at a tasting.
Yeah, one of Sam's events, yeah.
And we didn't care for them at all.
You bought a bottle.
I bought the Cuvée because that was the only one I liked.
We tried 3, so you bought 33% of the things.
Well, that's how it works, Dan. Great job with the percentage math. For those that don't know, it's single malt. Their normal product is a blend of Cuvée, ex-bourbon, and sherry casks, I believe, right?
Yeah, and also just a bit younger, which is why it's like $10 cheaper on the shelf than the other bottles. But their average age has increased, and they took a price decrease. That's something that is very foreign in this industry. We almost never see price decreases, let alone when the average age in the whiskey is increasing. So props to them. Yeah. If you like single malt, or if you're just looking for something different, it's a great change of pace from bourbon. But yeah, I mean, no peat. For those of you who think all single malt has peat. So it's also a very good gateway into Scotch. Or if you want to try something that's like Scotch, but still kind of has more of a bourbon feel, I would definitely try them again if you did when they first came out, because I think their latest batches are a little bit better and it's a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, and give the Cuvée or sherry finish a shot first, I think. Those will give you that kind of like bourbony sweetness that you're looking for. Surprisingly, in my opinion, the ex-bourbon cask finish doesn't quite deliver on what you think it will. So those other ones will give you a little bit more of that sweetness that you're used to with bourbon.
I think that's also the problem with them is a lot of they're marketing to a lot of bourbon fans, and they will pick up the bourbon cask. And when we had the master class with them, it was the least favorite by far. I think you're spot on there. It's a little one-dimensional compared to the other whiskeys. So, yeah.
Dan, any honorable mentions?
Nope, not at all.
I was waiting for the Buffalo. I was waiting for the Buffalo Trace argument.
You know who deserves an honorable mention?
Buffalo Trace.
You know who deserves an honorable mention, and that is Gold Eagle Jake for constantly dropping discount codes for our listeners to purchase whiskeys at Gold Eagle Wine and Spirits. Jake, where can people find Gold Eagle and buy stuff online?
That is a great plug, Dan. GoldEagleWine.com. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. And use these coupon codes. I will give them out again for those of you who can't remember. But BMFEW, 10% off our Few 6-year bottle and bond single barrel. There's only about 30 bottles of that left. Then BM Town for 10% off our Town Branch 7-year barrel proof Kentucky single barrel. GoldEagleWine.com. Download our app on the Apple App Store, Google Play Store. And I'll throw it back to you guys for Bourbon Matters plugs.
Yeah, so, Jake, obviously everyone's listening to us right now, but if they want to share this podcast with their friends, how can they do that?
You can share this podcast by clicking the share button on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts. Make sure you click the notification bell, like, subscribe, leave comments. Did we miss anything in this episode? Is there a sleeper out there? Is Dan the biggest ass kisser of all time? These are all important questions that our listeners should. Jake's. You always kiss Jake's ass.
I set him up for a plug.
I get shit on, then you go kiss Jake's ass. That's the dynamic from you on this podcast.
And he makes the best faces. If you didn't watch the video of this podcast, it's worth re-listening to.
Such an idiot, Jesus.
Follow us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters and Facebook. You can apparently send us emails anonymously through our website. Or you can just email us at bourbonmatterspodcast@gmail.com. If you have something that you want to say, feel free to DM us and all that fun stuff as well.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen.
All right.
That was fun.
Next week is going to be fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Next week, we're going to listen to a 2.5-hour Dan rant. So buckle up for that.
It might not be next week because there's a big thing happening at the end of August I kind of want to do first before we do that episode. So we might have to wait on that one because I'll have more information.
It's not going to be the end of August. What are you talking about?
No.
Are you talking about the end of July?
Until the end of August till we have the end of August. There's another meeting going on in Kentucky that Jamie's going down to, and I'd like to have that information before.
God.
I'm just saying it'd be the most informative at that point because we'll have actual information on some of these things.
All right, so no Dan rant next week.
We'll see. We'll discuss.
I could rant about something, but just not what you want me to rant about.
We'll figure out something else for Dan to get upset about.
Well, maybe it's worth doing a part 1 and part 2 after that information, but especially because we know Dan's gonna have a lot to talk about. But yeah.
Like the thing is, like it's gonna be me ranting, but I have a feeling that you guys are both 1,000% behind me on it. So.
Well, we know Jake's not going to be. I'll probably be split in the middle and probably leaning more towards Dan's side just because of what you texted us today, but we'll get into all that on the episode.
Yeah.
All I'm thinking right now is the Always Sunny on the Fence legislation episode. Science is a liar sometimes. All right. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Cheers.